Now that the Olympics are over and we have come down from this 3 week high that was Olympic basketball, I think we really need to take a serious look at how we operate as a nation when it comes to international basketball. Before we dive into things that I thought went wrong for us and what has gone wrong historically, I want to put out two things. One, I want you to know, as the viewer, that this isn't some curmudgeon, I can't believe that these games were this close malarkey like that. I come from a place of love because I truly love international basketball, and as someone who was born in the United States, there is some primal part of me that wants our country, my country, to do well. So, because I want them to do well, I need particular things to happen because I foresee a future where if we continue down this path, it will not go the way that we want it to. And the second thing I want to do is I want to give flowers. There were definitely some very good things that happened this Olympics, and I think they need to be recognized. First and foremost, congratulations to the big three, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry. This is probably the very last time that we will ever see the three of them compete on the same team in a game that matters. I mean, we may see an all-star game potentially with all of them, and we'll have a nice flashback to what we got to witness over the last 3 weeks. But I really do think that this was some sort of curtain call for them, and at different stages, they all showed out. LeBron James was probably the most consistent performer out of the three the entire Olympics. That's why he got the FIBA MVP award. For Kevin Durant, he wasn't as consistent as LeBron, but he picked his spots. There were moments down stretches of games, of tight games, in fact, where he proved to be instrumentally clutch, and his shot making ability is absolutely unmatched. And speaking of shot making ability, Steph Curry, he had we can be honest about it, awful first four games, but the last two games, the semifinals and the gold medal match against France, absolutely showed out. So congratulations to all three of them. I'm glad that I spent the last 13, 14, 15 years or so stop hating on them and what they are doing to my favorite team, and instead just appreciating them and who they are as players. And then I want to recognize two players in particular. One, I think, got some pretty decent recognition as far as his contributions went to the team, and it's Bam Adebayo. Bam is one of maybe 5 or 6 players in the history of the United States sending people over to represent their country that I consider to be perfect FIBA players. Understands the game, fits a role, does everything to a high enough level where you have to respect him in all regards. Bam is that kind of player. So he definitely deserves recognition. The other player that deserves a lot of recognition, and one who I did not see this particular tournament going in their favor, is Devin Booker. Devin, when this whole thing started, Kyle Kuzma posted some tweet about how we need superstars to take role player positions for the Olympics. That way we can succeed. And Devin Booker was the first one to respond and say that he would do it. At the time, I remember thinking, yeah, okay, Devin, we'll see. You're getting paid $40 million a year. You're not going to, take charges and set screens and move off the ball. Like, it's not going to happen. And he proved me wrong every single step of the way. So Devin Booker definitely needs to be considered for maybe not the MVP because, again, the big three were so good. But if we were ever going to have an all-star role player MVP, it would be for Devin Booker. Now, unfortunately, we have to talk about the bad, and I couldn't pick a better starting point than the coaching that I had to witness over the last month. I don't want to go as far as to say that Steve Kerr without Michael Jordan and Steph Curry would have 0 rings, but I'm right there, essentially. I'm a big fan of coaching. I love watching coaches get deep into their bag. I love watching new sets and how new offenses work, but I just didn't get any of that with Steve Kerr. And I have to jump onto the bandwagon here. If he didn't have 3 of the greatest players of all time playing for him on this team, there's a very good chance that we walk away with silver, maybe even bronze. And it wasn't just the knockout round and the group play that I was disappointed in. It was the stuff leading up to it, like the showcase. The training camp and the showcase are when you're supposed to figure out what goes on with your offense and what you can and can't run. And I just don't think that he ever figured that out. You don't need to be tinkering with an offense deep into group play or any of the knockout rounds. And the fact that you had so much firepower on your team and still almost lost to Serbia and nearly, again, without the intervention of superhuman play from LeBron James and Steph Curry against France, would have lost that game too. I don't want to just present a problem and not have a solution for it, because I think that the United States and the history of United States basketball has given us an incredibly successful precedent on how to handle this sort of situation. I think for professional athletes, there are many instances where you get tired of the same voice telling you what to do. And we had a little bit of that with the coaching staff here. Obviously, Steve Kerr coaches Steph Curry. We have Eric Spoelstra, who coaches Bam Adebayo. And while Ty Lue didn't coach anybody currently, like he isn't coaching anybody currently on the team, he has coached LeBron in the past. So I think that could run the risk of being in that same category of just being tired of the same voices. So instead of that, I think we need to look at the college ranks for our next coach to coach the men's basketball team. And there isn't one person better than I can think of than Dan Hurley from UConn. If you've seen any of UConn's games over the last 4 or 5 years, I don't have to tell you how good Dan Hurley is. He's going to get the best out of anybody who comes and represents for the United States in basketball. And he's a real player's coach, you know what I mean? Like, he understands egos and how people need to sacrifice. He knows how to tap into that and get them to sacrifice. The next thing I want to touch on is that our roster is so inconsistent. And I really think that is eventually going to hurt us. It may not be next Olympics. It might not be the next World Cup. It might not even be in the next 8 years. But eventually, we're going to run into a team that has played with each other and have so much chemistry that we will be dethroned. Now, some of that is not our fault. In Europe, there is this tournament called Eurobasket. It is where all the national teams of Europe come together and compete for a championship. It's kind of like the Euros in European football, but for basketball. And the regular people show up: Spain, Greece, Germany, all of them. They get to compete every 4 years, and it's never an issue. They understand that they are going to compete for Eurobasket and the World Cup and the Olympics, and they have consistency within their roster. Consistency matters. Reps matter. Understanding who you're playing with matters. And I think that is one of the biggest key factors in a lot of these nations who do well in tournaments like this. I think that understanding who you're playing with and having rapport with those teammates is really beneficial. Now, when you look at teams like Spain, Greece, and Germany, they all have a couple of core guys who are always in these tournaments, who always play with each other, and at bare minimum is a stabilizer for the new roster members that come in. Take Spain, for example. There is Rudy Fernandez, both of the Hernangomez brothers, and Ricky Rubio. And from 2016 to 2024, there were 7 competitions that Spain had been eligible for, whether that was Eurobasket, the World Cup, or the Olympics. And at least 2 of them has competed in all 7 of those tournaments from that point. Same thing with Greece. You have the Antetokounmpo brothers. You have 2 other people who, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your name unless you are in a basketball mode. Like, I can't look at the name and know how to pronounce it, but if I'm watching the game, I'll figure it out. I'm so sorry for that. But they have been eligible for 5 of those tournaments, and they have a combination of 2 of those players in each one of those 5 tournaments. And for Germany, there is Daniel Theis and Dennis Schroeder and Volgeman. Again, 5 tournaments that you've qualified for, 5 appearances. Now, for the United States, there is a version of Eurobasket. It's called the AmeriCup. However, that tournament happens in like February, early March of each year, and that is right in the middle of the NBA season. So a lot of times, especially when the AmeriCup was used to qualify teams for the World Cup or the Olympic tournament, we would just send whoever we could. And we still do that now. There's just lesser stakes. Now, that I will give us a pass for, okay? So we obviously couldn't compete in AmeriCup, even though theoretically we could just move that tournament, FIBA, get on it. I don't know what else to tell you. But in the Olympics and the World Cups that we have been able to qualify for from 2016 till now, there isn't really that stabilizer that I've been talking about. The most consistent person that I've been able to find is Kevin Durant, who has only been to 3 of those events out of the 5 that we have been eligible for. Other guys who are starting to make a run at it, like Jason Tatum and Derek White, they've been at 2 out of 5. Bam, who's been really consistent, 2 out of 5. Anthony Edwards, who was on this World Cup team and this Olympic team, that's it, 2 out of 5. We don't have this consistent stabilizer in anything like that. The part that bothers me the most about the consistency aspect of it, how we don't have core members of our team, is that we already have infrastructure for that. We, as the United States Board of Selecting, like the selection committee of who gets to go to these particular tournaments, we already have that infrastructure. When we look at the women's team, people who are core members of that team, of course, like Diane Taurasi, but I kind of want to exclude her because she's been around for so long for so many things. So we're going to look at that 2016 to 2024. People like Asia Wilson have been to 4 of those events. People like Brianna Stewart have been to 5 of those events. Like, pillars of the future are going to all of these events, and they are getting reps with their Olympic teammates. They are international teammates. Like, they understand how this works because there are so many reps. So this graph here, these are just a couple of people who showed up on this Olympic roster. And if you look at it, this isn't their first rodeo. This is, at bare minimum, their second time playing with a majority of these players. So if we can do it for our women's team, I don't understand why we can't do it for our men's team as well. One of the last things that I wanted to mention is kind of multiple things in one, and that is just the overall roster construction. I think that we are getting to a point in worldwide basketball where we can't just send anybody out and expect to do well. I think that the world is catching up in a very rapid rate to what the United States has been able to display as far as their dominance goes over the last 20 years. Every country now can give us a run for their money, and there aren't many teams where we can just run out whoever and beat them by 30. We need to have purpose behind our roster. I think having specialists and archetypes are really important behind a roster construction, but I also think that the versatility aspect is going to be super vital. This, again, is a positionless game. Everybody does everything, so you need to have a roster that reflects that. Now, I did create this roster of who I think would best represent the United States, not only to compete for a gold in 2028, but to fill out the hopes and dreams that I have as an organization that United States basketball is for the future. Now, of course, you have specialists like Tyrese Halliburton, your playmaker. You have undisputed guys like Anthony Edwards and Jason Tatum. And then you have defensive-minded players like Bam Adebayo and Evan Mobley. Everybody else is pretty versatile in what that they can do. And I do want to say that this was extremely hard to come up with this roster. There were a lot of really talented people that I had to leave off of the roster only because there's so much immense talent within the league. One of the more notable people who I regrettably left off was Paolo Banchero. I think nothing but the best for Paolo. I think that he is going to be an all NBA caliber player in the next couple years, but I just didn't think that his particular skill sets fit this team as well as others, and that's why I left him off. But this is the kind of roster that you need to be able to compete with some of these countries. You have shooting, you have wing play, you have defensive-minded bigs and wings, you have do-it-all fours. Like, everything that you need is within this roster. The only thing that I could really hope for is that we continue to have players like Devin Booker, who are undeniable superstars, be able to come down and to sacrifice their ego to be able to play in a lesser role. In case that doesn't happen, I also have selected a lot of players who, for a lack of a better term, are second and third fiddle on their own team. Guys like Michael Porter Jr., who obviously play off of Jokic very well. Chet Holmgren plays off of SGA. Evan Mobley plays off of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Like, these guys understand already how to work within an offense where you aren't the undisputed guy. And I'm hoping with that mix of role players, guys who are undeniably sacrificing their superstardom for the greater good, and guys who are going to step up in the absence of some of the greatest of all time like LeBron, KD, and Steph. I think with that kind of mix, it can only prove positive for us going forward. I also think that it's really important for every major cycle, like for a World Cup and an Olympic cycle, we have this influx of young talent. For my pick here, the obvious one is Cooper Flagg. He will be a third-year player at that point, and he's going to get a lot of added benefit, a lot of much-needed experience hanging around with those kind of vets to help him propel his superstardom in the future. And we're going to have younger talent in here as well. Chet Holmgren and Evan Mobley is obviously probably the best examples of that. They are so good right now, but they're still so young. And I think if you continually have this young talent around, it just sets up future building blocks for the next generation of American talent. And the last thing in this section is just the mentorship that we have seen throughout the United States history, there is obviously some mentorship going on. You see guys like Kobe take Anthony Davis under their wing, and it is super beneficial. I just think there needs to be more of it. Like, again, for my scenario, for my roster, Evan Mobley, I still have a bunch of stock in. I think that if Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren did not exist, we're probably talking about him being a multi-time Defensive Player of the Year. But being able to learn from Bam Adebayo, someone who plays that exact same position, is going to be super valuable to him. In that same vein, I think that Chet Holmgren, his next step as a superstar is the playmaking ability. So I think that being able to be around someone like Jason Tatum for an extended period of time, someone that point forward, that do it all forward, could really help him. And again, in that same sort of vein, Cooper Flagg, I think not just being around this group of immense talent, but being around someone like Scotty Barnes in particular, I think would really propel him to be the superstar that we all think that he could be. Again, I love international basketball. I love when the United States gets an opportunity to represent not just themselves, but myself as well as a citizen of this country. Being able to go on a stage like the World Cup or the Olympics and show out, it really makes me excited. I love watching Team USA. So I criticize only because I care. And Grant Hill, if you are somehow listening to this, please hire me. I think that we could have a really beautiful partnership. But that's all I have for today. What did you think of the Olympics, and what do you think America can improve on going forward? Drop your questions or comments down below. Check my link tree while you're down there. I got a TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and all kinds of other things you can connect with me on other levels. Have a good day. Be kind. Tell somebody you love them. And I'll see you in the next one.